My name is Joe Esposito. I was Elvis Presley's road manager and right-hand man and a very close friend of mine. I loved him very much. From the time we were discharged from the Army in
At 77, Red West finally reveals what really happened the night before Elvis Presley was found dead at Graceland. Questions return about why he was suddenly fired from Elvis's inner circle. Did he see something that led to his removal? Could Elvis's death have been prevented if he spoke up earlier? How Red West entered Elvis Presley's inner circle. Red West met Elvis Presley long before the world knew Elvis as a global star. It was in Memphis, Tennessee, when both of them were still young and life was simple. They came from the same environment, moved through the same streets, and shared the same circle of friends. At that time, Elvis was just a local boy with a voice that made people stop and listen, but no one could yet imagine what he would become. Red West and his cousin Sonny West became close to Elvis during those early years. Their bond was not built on fame or money. It was built on familiarity and trust. They were friends first, long before anything official came into the picture. As Elvis started to gain attention in the mid-1950s, his life began to change quickly. Crowds grew larger, attention became constant, and his movements became less private. Through all of this, Red and Sonny stayed close. When Elvis's career exploded, everything around him became more controlled. Managers, schedules, and public demands started to shape his daily life. But Red West remained one of the few people who had known him before all of that. Because of this history, Elvis kept him near. What started as friendship slowly shifted into responsibility. Red was no longer just a companion from Memphis. He began to help protect Elvis as the pressure around him increased. Over time, Red West and Sonny West became part of Elvis's informal security. They were not just standing beside him in public. They were also there in private spaces, watching over him as his fame grew heavier. Their role was simple at first, but it became more important as Elvis moved deeper into the music and film world. They traveled with him, stayed close during performances, and made sure his movements were as safe as possible in a world that constantly surrounded him. Even when Elvis entered military service and stepped away from music for a short period, the bond did not break. When he returned, his career became even bigger. Films, concerts, and recordings filled his life again. And with that return came even more pressure. Red West also returned to his side, now fully part of the inner circle that surrounded Elvis at Graceland and on the road. Graceland became more than just a home. It became a place where Elvis lived under constant attention. Red West was often there, not as a distant employee, but as someone trusted enough to move through that space freely. He was present during long nights, busy schedules, and moments when Elvis needed people around him who understood both the star and the person behind it. But Red West was never only a bodyguard. He had another side to him. He was a writer and someone interested in music creation. This part of his life slowly became connected to Elvis's world in a different way. Instead of only protecting Elvis physically, he also began contributing creatively. This made their relationship more layered than most people realized. It was not just about security, it was also about music, ideas, and shared professional space. As Elvis's fame grew stronger, Red West remained one of the few constant figures who had known him from the beginning. Their connection carried history, trust, and familiarity that could not easily be replaced. But at the same time, the world around Elvis was changing fast. The simple friendship they once had now existed inside a life filled with pressure, expectations, and non-stop attention. Even with all the changes, Red West stayed close. He had seen Elvis before the fame, watched him rise through it, and became part of the structure that surrounded him at the peak of his career. That long connection would later shape everything that followed in their story. When friendship turned into music and memory, Red West's connection with Elvis Presley was not only built on friendship and protection, it also grew through music. While many people around Elvis worked only in management or security, Red had something different to offer. He was creative. He wrote songs. This gave their relationship another level that went beyond daily duties and travel routines. As Elvis's career moved through the 1960s, Red West became part of his songwriting circle. This was a space where ideas were shaped into music and where simple thoughts could turn into songs recorded by major artists. Red was not always in the spotlight, but his work reached far beyond Graceland. One of the songs linked to this creative space was "If Every Day Was Like Christmas," recorded by Elvis in 1966. It showed a softer side of Elvis's music during that period. Another important piece was "That's Someone You Never Forget," connected to the 1962 Potluck album. It was later released as a single in 1967 and included in the Artist of the Century collection. These songs carried emotional depth and became part of Elvis's wider musical identity. Red West's writing also reached Elvis's film world. You'll Be Gone appeared as a bonus track on the Girl Happy soundtrack album. It was another example of how his creative input blended into Elvis's career across both music and movies. Their collaboration did not stop there. Years later, in 1972, Red co-wrote Separate Ways with Richard Manegra, specifically for Elvis. This song reflected emotional distance and personal reflection, fitting into Elvis's later style. In 1975, Red continued this creative path with If You Talk in Your Sleep, co-written with Johnny Christopher for the Promised Land album. By this time, Elvis's music had changed, but Red was still part of the writing process. Their connection remained active even as Elvis's life became more complicated. Outside of Elvis, Red West's songwriting reached many other well-known artists. His work was recorded by Pat Boone, Ricky Nelson, Johnny Burnett, Johnny Rivers, Dino, Desi and Billy, Petula Clark, Gary Puckett and the Union Gap, Andre Kostelanetz, and Little Milton. This wide list showed that Red was not limited to one career path. He was quietly building respect in the music industry while still staying close to Elvis. This creative work strengthened his position around Elvis. He was no longer just a friend from Memphis or a member of security. He had become part of the professional world surrounding Elvis Presley. He understood both the personal side and the working side of Elvis's life. This made him a rare presence in the inner circle. However, as the years moved into the 1970s, things around Elvis began to change. His schedule became heavier, and his lifestyle became more difficult to manage. The same closeness that allowed Red to contribute creatively also placed him near the growing tension in Elvis's world. He saw the pressure building up in ways that were not always visible to the public. Red's role as both songwriter and close companion meant he stood at a difficult point between friendship and reality. He was part of the music, but also close enough to see the strain behind it. The more he contributed creatively, the more he remained inside Elvis's personal space, where things were becoming harder to control. This combination of friendship and creative partnership made their bond unique, but it also placed Red in a position where he could not separate music from personal concern. As Elvis's life moved forward, the balance between art and struggle became harder to ignore. What would happen when loyalty, creativity, and concern all began to collide inside one relationship? When trust began to break. By the mid-1970s, the relationship between Elvis Presley and his security team had started to change in a serious way. What once looked like loyalty and protection was now surrounded by tension and public attention. Elvis was performing regularly in Las Vegas, and the environment around him had become more intense, with large crowds and constant pressure to maintain control in every appearance. During this period, Red West, his cousin Sonny West, and fellow bodyguard David Hebler were responsible for managing Elvis's safety. Their job placed them very close to both Elvis and the public. However, this closeness also meant that every action they took was highly visible and often judged. In 1976, reports surfaced in the media accusing them of using overly strict methods while handling fans during Elvis's Las Vegas shows. These incidents quickly attracted attention and created controversy around Elvis's team. As criticism grew, the situation around Elvis became more sensitive. His performances were still drawing attention, but behind the scenes, pressure was building. Security was becoming harder to manage, and the balance between protecting Elvis and controlling public interaction was becoming more difficult. The atmosphere around his appearances began to feel heavier, not just for the audience, but for the people working closely with him. The tension eventually reached Elvis's family management. Vernon Presley, Elvis's father, who played an important role in managing aspects of his son's career, made a major decision. Red West, Sonny West, and David Hebler were dismissed from their positions. This decision marked the end of their official roles within Elvis's security team. The firing was presented publicly as a management choice connected to security concerns and the need to protect Elvis's public image. On the surface, it looked like a simple organizational change. However, for those involved, it carried deeper meaning. It was not just about job roles, it was about trust, long history, and a connection that had existed for many years. Red West and Sonny West had known Elvis long before fame fully shaped his life. Their removal from his inner circle created a clear break in that long relationship. It was not just a professional separation. It also affected personal bonds that had been built over time. The sense of loyalty that had once defined their connection was now under strain. Inside the situation, there were unspoken concerns that went beyond public statements. Elvis's lifestyle, health, and increasing dependence on a tightly controlled environment were becoming harder to manage. Those closest to him could see the challenges growing, but there was no simple way to address them without creating conflict. This made the atmosphere even more tense. After being dismissed, Red West, Sonny West, and David Hebler found themselves outside the circle they had once been part of for years. This change forced them to reconsider everything that had happened during their time with Elvis. They were no longer working inside his world, but they still carried memories and experiences from it. In the time that followed, they began thinking about how to share their side of the story. Their experiences were not just about security work or public incidents. They were also about what they had seen and felt while being close to one of the most famous figures in the world. The decision to speak up was not immediate, but the pressure of everything that had built up made it difficult to remain silent. As distance grew between them and Elvis's world, questions started to form about what really happened behind the scenes during those final years of working together. If trust could break so suddenly after nearly 2 decades, what was really happening inside Elvis Presley's world that no one was ready to fully talk about? The book that changed everything. After leaving Elvis Presley's security team, Red West, Sonny West, and David Hebler were no longer part of his daily world. But their connection to him did not disappear. What they had seen and experienced over the years stayed with them. As time passed, they made a decision that would change everything. They worked together on a tell-all manuscript titled Elvis: What Happened? The book quickly became one of the most talked about accounts ever written by people who had been close to Elvis. It was not written by outsiders or reporters. It came from men who had worked beside him, traveled with him, and seen parts of his private life that the public never saw. Because of this, it carried a heavy weight and drew strong attention from the moment it became known. Inside the manuscript, they focused on serious concerns they had carried for a long time. They described Elvis's declining physical condition, the visible strain in his daily life, and patterns of prescription substance use that they believed were affecting him deeply. These were not casual observations. They were the result of years of being close enough to notice changes that others outside his circle could not easily see. They also raised concerns about the environment around Elvis. The book suggested that people close to him were unable or unwilling to properly intervene as his condition worsened. It painted a picture of a situation where warnings were present, but effective action was limited or delayed. This added a layer of urgency and sadness to the story they were trying to tell. However, the most difficult part of the entire situation was not only what the book contained, but why it existed in the first place. People began to ask if this was an honest attempt to reveal truth, or a break of loyalty towards someone they had once protected closely. Red West and his co-authors were no longer just former employees. They were now seen by many as individuals who had crossed a line between private loyalty and public disclosure. This question created strong debate. Some believed they were trying to expose serious issues that needed attention. Others saw it as a betrayal of trust, especially considering how long they had stood beside Elvis during his rise and success. The same relationship that had once been built on protection and closeness was now being judged through the lens of public opinion and controversy. When the manuscript became widely known, it brought intense attention to Elvis Presley's private life. Discussions about his health and lifestyle increased in the public space. The story of Elvis was no longer only about music and fame. It now included questions about his well-being behind closed doors. This shift changed how many people viewed his final years. The impact of the book also reached personal relationships. Red West's connection with the Presley family and others within Elvis's remaining circle was deeply affected. The trust that once existed did not remain the same. Lines were drawn, and distance grew between people who had once shared the same inner world. Even after all of this, one question continued to follow Red West. People could not agree on how to define his actions. Some viewed him as someone who broke loyalty, while others believed he was trying to speak about issues that had been ignored for too long. His role in Elvis's story became one of the most debated parts of his life. The truth behind the decision to publish the manuscript remained complex. It was shaped by years of experience, personal loyalty, concern, and frustration. It was not a simple choice, and it did not lead to a simple outcome. Instead, it created a lasting divide in how people understood both Elvis Presley's final years and Red West's place in his story. As the controversy settled but never fully disappeared, one question lingered in the background, growing heavier with time and memory. Was the truth they revealed worth the price of everything they lost? The weight Elvis carried in his final years. In the final years of Elvis Presley's life, everything around him became heavier. The demands of fame did not slow down, even as his health began to weaken. His schedule still involved performances, appearances, and constant expectations from fans and the industry. At the same time, his body was no longer responding the way it once did. This created a difficult balance that became harder to maintain with each passing year. Elvis faced ongoing health problems that affected his daily routine. He struggled with exhaustion that did not fully go away, even after rest. His sleep patterns became irregular, and nights often stretched into long hours without proper rest. During the day, his energy levels could change quickly, making his routine unpredictable. These physical changes slowly became part of his normal life, even as they continued to worsen. Alongside these issues, there was increasing dependence on prescription medication. Over time, this became a central part of how his condition was managed. Different doctors were involved in his care, and multiple prescriptions were used as part of his treatment. This medical involvement created a complex situation that shaped many of his daily decisions and routines. As these health challenges continued, Elvis's physical appearance also changed. Weight fluctuations became noticeable, and his strength was not as consistent as before. These changes were not sudden. They developed gradually, becoming more visible over time. For those around him, it was clear that he was dealing with more than just normal fatigue from work. His connection with medical professionals became an important part of understanding this period of his life. Instead of a simple doctor and patient relationship, it became a network of care that influenced his lifestyle in many ways. Prescriptions, consultations, and ongoing treatments were part of his regular routine. This medical dependence added another layer of pressure to his already demanding life. But the challenges were not only physical. Elvis also faced emotional strain that built up quietly. Fame placed him under constant public attention, and privacy became limited. Even in moments of rest, he remained connected to a world that expected him to perform and maintain a certain image. This made it difficult for him to fully separate his personal life from his public identity. Isolation also became a part of his experience. Despite being surrounded by people, there were moments when he appeared emotionally distant. The pressure to remain strong in public often meant keeping personal struggles hidden. This created an internal conflict between how he was seen by the world and what he was experiencing privately. For Red West, who had known Elvis since their early years in Memphis, these changes were deeply concerning. He had seen Elvis before fame, during his rise, and through his peak years. Because of this long history, he could recognize when things were no longer the same. The shift was not sudden to him. It was a slow transformation that became more difficult to ignore over time. From Red's perspective, Elvis's condition raised serious concerns about whether earlier action could have made a difference. The question of intervention became part of later discussions about those final years. It was not a simple issue because many factors were involved, and decisions were not easy to make in such a complex environment. As Elvis continued through these final years, the gap between his public image and private reality became wider. On stage, he was still Elvis Presley, the performer. Behind the scenes, however, life was becoming more difficult to manage. The contrast between these two worlds defined much of this period. And as his condition continued to decline quietly behind the spotlight, one question remained unanswered beneath all the fame and silence. Could anyone around him truly have changed what was already in motion? The final hours before Elvis Presley's death. On August 16, 1977, Elvis Presley passed away at Graceland in Memphis. The news marked the end of a life that had shaped music and culture for years. At the time, the house was filled with confusion and urgency as people inside tried to understand what was happening. Movement inside the property became restricted, and access to certain areas was controlled as the situation unfolded. Inside Graceland, communication was not clear. People moved quickly from room to room, trying to respond to an emergency that no one was fully prepared for. The normal flow of the house disappeared in a short time. What remained was uncertainty, silence, and a growing sense that something irreversible had taken place. Red West was not inside the immediate household when the situation began. However, he was quickly informed that something serious was happening. As news reached him, it spread through those who had once been part of Elvis's close security circle. The reaction among them was immediate. Shock and disbelief became the first response, as many struggled to accept what they were hearing. For Red West, the moment carried deep emotional weight. Elvis was not just a famous figure to him. He was someone he had known for many years, long before fame changed everything. Hearing the news brought a personal sense of loss that went beyond public headlines. It was the end of a long connection that had begun in Memphis during their younger years. As the news of Elvis's death spread, questions began almost immediately. People wanted to understand what had happened in the hours leading up to that moment. Small details were examined closely, and different accounts began to appear. Some information matched official statements, while other reports did not fully align. This created confusion and led to ongoing public discussion. The early conversations around his death were filled with uncertainty. Different versions of events circulated quickly, and it became difficult to separate confirmed details from speculation. This added more tension to an already emotional situation. The lack of complete clarity made it harder for people to fully understand the final hours of Elvis's life. For those who had worked closely with him, including Red West, the emotional impact was strong. Alongside grief, there was also reflection. Thoughts turned to earlier years, to warnings, concerns, and moments that now felt heavier in hindsight. The idea of what could have been done differently became part of private thoughts and later discussions. Red West later expressed regret about not being able to change the direction of Elvis's final years. He questioned whether stronger intervention from those around him could have made a difference. These thoughts were not simple or clear. They were shaped by time, memory, and the difficulty of looking back at events that could not be changed. The loss also brought a sense of unresolved emotion. Elvis's death did not only close a chapter in music history, it also left behind personal questions for those who had been closest to him. For Red West, the connection he had built over many years did not simply end with fame or distance. It ended with a moment that came suddenly and permanently. As the world reacted to the news, the private grief of those who knew Elvis personally continued in a quieter way. Behind public attention and media coverage, there were individuals trying to process what had happened on a deeply personal level. The reality of his absence settled slowly but firmly, and as the first shock began to fade, another question remained in the silence that followed. What would the people closest to Elvis carry with them after that final day had passed? Red West's final years. After Elvis Presley's death, Red West continued to live for many years. His life moved forward in time, but the connection to Elvis never fully left him. Even as he built his own path, people still remembered him most for the role he played in Elvis's inner circle. That connection followed him into every stage of his later life, shaping how others saw him and how he saw his own past. Red West remained active in the entertainment world after leaving Elvis's team. He worked in film and television, taking on different roles that allowed him to stay in the industry he understood well. These later years showed a different side of him, separate from his time as a bodyguard. Still, no matter what he did professionally, the shadow of Elvis Presley's story was always present in public perception. As time passed, Red sometimes reflected on his earlier years with Elvis. These reflections were not constant public statements, but quiet acknowledgments of a past that carried both closeness and difficulty. He had known Elvis from a young stage of life, witnessed his rise, and been present during years that later became heavily discussed in music history. That long connection made his memories both personal and complex. The bond between them had once been built on trust and familiarity. Over time, it passed through friendship, work, tension, and separation. By the end of it all, what remained was a long history that could not be separated from either man's story. For Red West, that history stayed with him throughout his life, even when he was no longer part of Elvis's world. On July 18, 1917, Red West passed away at the age of 81. His death came from an aortic aneurysm and took place at Baptist Memorial Hospital in Memphis, the same city where much of his early life and his connection to Elvis had begun. The location of his passing created a quiet sense of full circle, linking the beginning and end of his long journey in the same place. His death came less than 2 months after the passing of his cousin, Sonny West. The closeness and timing between the two deaths added another emotional layer for those who remembered their shared history with Elvis. Both men had been part of the same inner circle during Elvis's life, and both had carried their own experiences from that period into the years that followed. Red West's funeral took place on July the 24th, 1917, at Memorial Park Cemetery in Memphis. It was a private and respectful farewell in the city that had shaped so much of his life. The ceremony marked the closing of a long personal journey that had begun decades earlier in the same environment where he first met Elvis Presley. In public memory, Red West remained closely tied to two main parts of his life. The first was his role as part of Elvis Presley's inner circle, a position that placed him near one of the most famous figures in music history. The second was his involvement in the tell-all manuscript, Elvis, What Happened?, which continued to generate discussion long after its release. These two elements shaped how people viewed him. To some, he was remembered as someone who stood close to Elvis during important years. To others, he was connected to difficult questions about loyalty, truth, and responsibility. His legacy was not simple or one-sided. It existed in layers that reflected both friendship and conflict. Even in later years, the decisions he made continued to be discussed. The book he helped create, the concerns he raised, and the reflections he shared all contributed to a lasting debate about his role in Elvis's story. For some, it represented an attempt to reveal hidden struggles. For others, as it raised questions about trust and silence within close relationships. What made Red West's story complex was not only what he did, but the position he held. He was someone who had seen Elvis before fame fully transformed his life, stayed close during his rise, and remained present during years of growing pressure. That long timeline made his perspective unique, but also emotionally heavy. How much of Elvis's true story did Red West carry with him to the very end? Do you think Elvis' death could have been prevented?